Hello and welcome to another episode of Emacs Chat, this time with Christopher Wellons, who is, among other things, the author of something that will play play Tetris in Emacs for you. Uh, so, hello Christopher, thank you for joining us.
Hello?
Yes, okay, so I initially reached out to you because I read your blog post about foreign function interfaces and all those other things. And then I realized you're the same guy who put together skewer mode and other really cool interactive ways to use Emacs. But before we dig into how you got into Emacs and all the interesting things that you do with it, can you tell us a little bit about who you are outside of Emacs?
I'm your typical computer geek, I guess. I've been using Emacs for 9 years, but that's not outside of Emacs. Um, I run regularly. So I'm a runner. I'm out there 3 days a week. I like computer games. I like reading, um, and I spend a lot of time watching YouTube videos. Actually, that's sort of a big hobby. Is I find these long half-hour long clips of series of mostly people playing video games. So instead of playing games myself, I watch people play games, because a lot of time I can do my own thing while they're doing that. So it's almost like multitasking that way.
Yeah, and then you get all the benefits of the funny moments of the games without having to do any of the hard work. And
Yeah.
I noticed on your blog that you also make computer games like roguelikes. So
Occasionally, I like participating in the 7-day roguelike contest every year. It's a fun thing to do for a week. I like the constraints that I only have to worry about it for a week, and then I get to forget about it after that.
so a lot of fun interests. So you mentioned that you started Emacs just 9 years ago, which is
Yes.
pretty amazing. How did you get into it?
So I was on an internship in college at the time, and I was getting a lot more serious about programming. I've been programming for 19 years now, since I was a little kid. So doing an internship. I was getting serious about it, and up until that point, I'd just been using Kwrite and some basic stuff. And I'd read probably something about Richard Stallman and probably Steve Yegge, some of his Lisp essays, and uh, I decided, I should look into this Emacs thing, and that's what ended up happening. And I installed it and read the manual and was reading all this material. I got one of those O'Reilly Emacs books, and I read
Oh
that,
yeah.
and just kind of gradually built up from that point. It
Mhm.
became my only text editor quickly.
Were you customizing it right away, or do you start off using it as a programming environment for a while?
I was customizing it right away, mostly copying and pasting snippets here and there, because I didn't really understand what a lot of it did. Just, oh, this thing will tell me how many words are in a buffer, and then I drop that into my configuration. And it wasn't until actually a few years ago that I put my Emacs configuration in source control, so the whole thing is carefully curated now, unlike the sort of mess of files I copy around that I was doing for a few years there.
So did you end up declaring Emacs bankruptcy then and starting from scratch when you started creating it into your
Uh,
config, or?
it's pretty close to from scratch. It got heavily redone. We'll take a look at it, I'm sure. But I've got a little macro to help organize things and package things up into nice, clean blocks. So that happened about the same time I put it in source control, almost like a rewrite.
Now, 9 years ago, we didn't have a lot of the same resources we have now for learning more about Emacs configuration snippets. I mean, no GitHub. I don't even remember if Emacs Wiki was around then. So you mentioned the book was useful, the O'Reilly book. But were there other resources that you found helpful?
After that, well, actually, I gave away the O'Reilly book years ago, because that's just a beginner book. I gave it to a coworker, hoping to get her into Emacs and get that going. But since then, it's really just been um, primarily just reading the Emacs Lisp reference manual. And there's still so much in that manual that I don't know about. Like I go through it all the time, and I've gone through it like cover to cover basically a couple of times. But there's still things I miss, little details, and I go back like, oh, I didn't know you could do this.
Yeah, yeah. I find that every time I read the manuals, I come across something new. Last time I reread the Emacs manual, I learned how to add Unicode characters. So it just there's just so much to learn.
Yeah.
And so okay, so yeah, definitely reading the manual, probably reading the source code as well. You mentioned coworkers. Do you have other coworkers who are actually using Emacs too?
Yes, I've got a few coworkers, and not many. Uh, and I spend time discussing Emacs with all of them on occasion, just kind of sharing notes and on how we do things. And what's funny is that pretty much all of them have adopted the color theme. I've went with the wombat color theme that comes with Emacs, and like it seems like everybody uses that now that I work with. So that's kind of fun to see that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that looks familiar when I see their screens.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the kind of the diffusion of practices when several people who use Emacs work together.
Yeah.
And are you sharing? Well, your config is on GitHub, so I guess people can pick up interesting tips off that one as well. Okay, so you chat with other people, you learn from books, learn from source code, and this all of that the hacking that you've been doing around building web servers and other interactive services. You actually even put together something that can talk to inferior Emacs processes, so running Emacs within Emacs or
Oh,
something of the sort.
that was a project for just a couple weeks ago. I didn't even announce it yet at this
Oops.
point.
I was looking
No,
through the GitHub
that's fine.
repositories. It looked funny. So how do you get to the point where, yes, you started customizing it right off the bat 9 years ago, but how do you get to the point where you're comfortable enough with all these Emacs internals to just say, oh, I think I would like Emacs to interact live with a web browser?
That's basically what it comes to. I can make it do almost anything I wanted to do right now. So I just have to, if I have an idea, like, oh, I'm gonna try that, and that's becomes like my primary focus for a short period of time until I make it work that way. Uh, to elaborate on that. So I've got a Steam account, and I've got something like 200, 300 games in there, but I rarely ever play them because these little programming activities are just like almost always more fun. Like I could play this game, or I could tinker with Emacs, and it's almost always Emacs. Tinkering with Emacs sounds like more fun.
There you have it. Emacs is more addictive than the games that you can play on Steam. I've heard that from other Emacs geeks as well. I mean, this is what we do for relaxation and fun and intellectual curiosity. So basically, you learn about all these things by simply having crazy ideas. Like, what if I could use Emacs to play Tetris on its own, and then digging around in the code to figure out how to do
Yeah.
it.
So you saw the auto Tetris mode then.
I just came across that
Okay.
today. I often show Tetris, kind of when you're demonstrating Emacs to other people and you want to boggle their mind about just how much is in Emacs. And so I normally show things like, Tetris and Doctor and whatever, and now I can
Yeah.
show Tetris and Auto Tetris and drive
Yeah.
people crazy. Okay, so lots of really odd and interesting things. One of the things that people are often curious about is how actually people use Emacs. What's your workflow like? What are the different things that you've configured? And yeah, you've shared your config on GitHub. By the way, folks listening, you can find Christopher Wellons on GitHub as Skeeto, Skeeto. But would you like to take us through some of the, I guess, the highlights of your config, particularly interesting snippets that you like using?
Sure. Should I switch to my screencast here then?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And folks, while he's doing that, you can ask questions by submitting them through the Q&A app or adding them to the event page. Or if you're an IRC, there's an Emacs-chat channel on Freenode. Okay, so you've got stuff.
So that's actually my server log, which I'll show off soon. All right. So here is my init file. So you can see that okay.
Yep, I can see that just fine.
So something that'll stand out pretty quick is, so if I come down a little bit, so I've got this with package
Mm-hmm.
macro here. You'll see that show up over and over again. And This is something I wrote myself, and there are a bunch of different versions. Everybody's kind of written their own little version of this because there isn't an official one at this point. Um, and it sort of groups related configuration options together into a block. So instead of having all this loose stuff just kind of dumped in, I can say everything related to Uniqueify goes in this block. Everything related to eShell is going to go in this block right here. And I don't have to list any of the packages. So I use ELPA and MELPA. So I don't have to list any of those packages explicitly. As long if I just mention it here in this with package, it'll automatically get installed when Emacs starts if it's not already installed.
I should do that. I'm currently using use package by John Weegley, but it doesn't do the installs. So so this will actually, mean it always happens. Yeah.
I think use package is like it is another one of these macros that's like somebody else has written, and there are a few of them out there. I've got some. Mine's kind of cryptic. Like if you look at this entry here, I've got this this asterisk. So this says so up here the ones without the asterisk are lazily loaded. So these are only it lets Emacs load them with auto load as late as possible. With this one with the asterisks. Or force loaded, so it will always, like Uniqueify, I don't want to wait for something to happen for that to load. I want that just to load right away so that it's active. So it's got a little asterisk on it. Same with winter mode, which with winter mode, you can hop up with arrow keys back and forth between buffers. I like doing that.
Yeah.
And then there are asterisks on other things, and it has to do with auto loads, and it's pretty cryptic, but it's really useful for me. That's why I haven't really put this out there for other people to use because it's not friendly yet.
And sometimes you have asterisks after the package name. What?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's what it's. So that's something that changed with package.el.
Yeah.
And the latest changes is it used to create a secondary package called with the same name but dash auto loads, and there's this really cool trick where you could require the auto loads package, and you could do some configuration lazily, and it was a nice trick, but they got rid of that. There's no longer this auto loads package that's generated, so I had to modify my with package macro so that it has the same effect. And to do that, I have this little asterisk on the package names, and I want that effect. So in this case, I wanted to make sure I load the auto loads with Markdown mode, something like that. So that way, when any of these patterns are opened, it'll get set in Markdown mode because Markdown mode, the auto loads has already been set. It's something like that. I can't remember the details right now.
Cool. I might give that a try.
Other than that, there's not too much special in here. Just a bunch of things that I like to use. Like I've got right here, I can quickly look up Java documentation. I've got that bound to Control-HJ. So normally you can look up documentation with Control-HF, so I can look up Emacs stuff. Or I can do this, and I can look up, let's say I want to look up an array list. So I do this, and I'll pop it open on the browser here.
That's really neat.
And these are all the different packages that have been loaded into this quick jump stuff. And what makes this really work well is Java's JavaDoc is ubiquitous. Like all these packages have JavaDoc packages made, so it's easy. So documentation's in this nice clean format that I can jump to anywhere. So I can jump into the Lombok documentation that's installed locally on my machine by this process.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I often find myself ending up Googling for all all these details, but it's nice to have that just a quick keyboard shortcut away.
Yeah.
Multiple cursors is one of those things that I know I should be using because I hear it's super awesome, but I haven't quite gotten my mind wrapped around it yet.
Yeah. I mean, you can do this and modify all this stuff at once. I love that. That's really fun. I use that. And it's actually replaced. Normally, I would do stuff like that with a macro, and write a little macro that does this. I want to make the same mess. and then
That's
I
awesome.
do it like that. But multiple
Yeah, yeah,
cursors,
yeah,
that's so much more comfortable most of the time. That
yeah.
oops,
Okay. You just
yeah,
gotta get the hang of it. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah. But that's not mine, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So something I did want to show was impatient mode, since that was asked about specifically. So if you visit in your web browser, um,
I put the URL in the comments for the event so people can find that too. But there is.
zeus.nullprogram.com/8080, and I should check this myself. Make
Okay.
sure, yeah. So you'll see this here if you
Yeah.
visit it. And if you click on the scratch buffer, you'll see a copy of my scratch buffer here, and it even has syntax highlighting.
Oh, that's awesome. Huh. Wow. Uh, how have you used this? What have you used it for?
So if I need to share my screen with somebody remotely, this
Yeah.
is easier than going through a normal kind of screen sharing session like I'm doing right this minute. I can just uh, I can say visit. I can turn on impatient mode. Sorry, in a
Yeah.
buffer just like this. It's already turned on here, and then give them that URL, and they can visit that from their browser and watch what I'm doing. That's really useful if I pop up like an e shell like this,
Yeah.
and I can uh, go into. I can run a shell here and share that too. If
Huh.
I were to like turn on impatient mode in this buffer, now you'd be able to visit this and see this buffer.
Wow. What are the chances you actually are you building any two-way communication into this at some point?
Nope, it's just one way. And this was actually a collaboration between me and Brian Taylor. So it's a coworker and friend of mine.
Huh. That's
It's
pretty
a,
cool.
it's built on the same web server, which I call Simple HTTPD. It's the same one that Skewer uses. So any time I'm doing something with Emacs that involves the web, it's using my little web server.
Huh. I should try that too. It looks like you've put it to all sorts of really good uses. So you already have a video demoing Skewer, which allows you to easily interact with the JavaScript in a browser.
Yeah.
But this is pretty darn cool too. Okay. So there's that. So and there's impatient mode and skewer. So FFI is foreign functions. How are you using that? I mean, I saw your blog post demonstrating it, but I was curious about the practical applications that you were exploring.
So that kind of hit a wall a little bit as
Mm-hmm.
it gets complicated pretty quickly. So one problem I was having, I don't really have any real practical uses for it yet.
Okay.
I thought maybe I could run a GTK window and run a little graphical system that way. But if anybody who uses Linux and has launched GTK applications from a terminal knows that they're really noisy. It spits out lots of debugging messages, and that's actually because I haven't made it robust enough. Those messages are actually interfering with my communication with Emacs because it goes
Mm.
through a pseudo terminal, and error messages and standard messages get piped into the same pipe because of that, and it gets in the way. So I haven't done anything significant with that beyond just the little demos, which I can show here really quick.
Sure.
Um, Oops. So I'm just going to copy right out of my README here. Drop them in here. So whenever you start using the FFI, it has to create what I call a context, which is really just an Emacs inferior process that's running my little FFI program. And it's really simple. It's a stack machine that I can send strings and basic values to. So I can say, in this case, I've got sran, so I say um, here's my function name, here's the function signature, and it can push all these values onto the stack and then pop the values off, and I get them in Emacs. So here I can seed, if you know the
Yeah.
C function sran, seed the random number generator, so I can run that, and that returns a void right there. So clear these away, and then I can start generating random numbers.
Wow. Sorry, you said FFI call communicates with sorry, you say an inferior Emacs process or
It's an inferior process. So if
inferior
I
process?
go, um, so if I hop into here, so you see this glue program, FFI
Yeah.
glue. So it's just a
Ah,
C++
I see.
program that's linked with libFFI, this right
Yeah.
here, and then it just drives libFFI through this really simple protocol that it
Mm.
chats with through a pseudo terminal to this program, or through a pipe, I guess I'm using. So it's just a pretty simple stack machine to make that work. So here's the switch for the quote-unquote bytecode that makes it up. So I can push different sizes of integers onto the stack.
Yeah.
And that created this little glue program right here, FFI glue. So that's what this runs in the background.
Yeah, I was curious about because you mentioned you managed to get that to work as a package, and I was curious about how it all came together. So it's good to see that's how.
If it was going to become a package, there's complications with how do
Yeah.
you handle that binary,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's something I resolved with Emacs QL or Emacs QL. I don't know how you pronounce that out loud. I never say it out loud. Uh, this Emacs SQL. I don't know if you saw that. If
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
looking at my, so
Tell me about that.
that runs a sub process in the background, and then in order to make that work with SQLite out of the box as a package on Melpa, it actually ships with C source code, and it will attempt as best as it can to compile that when you install it. So it might take like a minute to install because it's going to run a C compiler synchronously to get that to work. So I can try to demonstrate it.
Yeah.
So I can make a database. Um, so I'm going to call it. This is going to make a SQLite database.
Yeah.
Oops. So load that in. Okay. So we got this connection object. So this is using a really cool part of Emacs now. It came from Cadet called EIEIO,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really clever. It's an object system that's like a lot like Common Lisp's class,
Mm.
and so these functions. There's also an ESQL MySQL, and then there's a PostgreSQL one, and actually two PostgreSQL drivers. So I can do this, and this would be a database name. So I've got a database on this system called testing. So it'll create this database object
Yeah.
that, thanks to EIEIO, will work with all the same, because they're generic functions, it'll work with all the same functions. So once you have this database object, you don't care what it is anymore. You can just use this same function, EMAXQL function, to make queries on it. So I can say create table like this. Yep. Oh. So I've created a table called foo. I can insert values into it.
Wow.
And if you notice, this is an S expression syntax here. So instead of doing strings like you might normally say,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
if
yeah.
I put in a string, I build up these vectors of symbols, and this actually compiles into SQL expression. If I can demonstrate that. So I've got oops. Or first, let me finish this statement first. I can say, so I can insert myself in the database, and yeah, let me copy that. So here's the expression, and I can compile that right there to see
Oh,
what it looks like. So that's what it's going to compile to
wow.
whenever it
Eh,
gets inserted.
that's cool.
So then I can make queries on the database, and this is, oops. So
It
there
seemed
it is. It comes out.
yeah, it seemed to double quote the Chris, but I guess no. Yeah.
Well, oh, so yeah, the extra quoting. So I'll go back to that. And this is something I'm not sure if I made the right choice on this.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's not a number. Well, first nil maps to null, so you get that direct mapping, and that feels really nice that way. So I can insert a null in the database just by making that nil right there. But anything that's not nil or a number will get printed into a string, and that whole value is inserted in the database. So I can demonstrate that. Um, let's say I had some kind of struct like this. That was an object. I could put this object in the database
Huh.
under the name field, and it'll get printed.
Really?
And then if I do a select on that, you'll see the same object come back out. Indent that. So that's why you see the extra quoting down here. Is that because it printed the string Chris right here?
I
If I
see.
made that symbol like this, oops, I don't need to quote that because it's already quoted. Insert that into the table. Query this again and come back out of the symbol.
Oh, oh, that's cool.
In the same way, I keep interrupting you.
No,
So
no,
if you
no.
see there,
I
just quote it
interrupt you.
differently.
That's cool. So now I'm curious, what got you interested in building this in the first place? Is it just, maybe we should be able to do all these database things from Emacs Lisp itself, or were you working on a project or something?
It goes back to lfeed, which is my web feed reader,
Yeah.
which skewer mode is probably my most used Emacs package right now in terms of popularity, number of people using it. But the most useful for me has been lfeed. So it's a web feed reader. I created it after Google Reader shut down,
Yeah.
and I wasn't happy with any of the alternatives. So I thought I could do better than all these, and I'll write my own. So that's what I ended up doing. So this thing here, I had to create, and to touch on EmacsQL, why that exists.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote this in August last year, and I wrote EmacsQL around the beginning of this year, the very end, around New Year's. And back in August when I wrote lfeed, I needed a database to store all this stuff in. So if I clear this out, you're going to see just in the last 10 weeks, this is all the different stuff that all the different entries that I've read and looked at. So in the last 10 weeks, there have been 2,451. If you look at
Wow.
the line number down at the bottom there. So this has to be put in a database. So plus all these tags, if you see the green on the right here, I can make
Yeah.
this. So you can see these got tags, and I can go into these and look at the content inside of these. So like here's in a real post that would be likely about Emacs. So I can read them right here inside Emacs, or I can find.
I saw in your screenshots you had images working in this too, so that's
Oh
really
yeah.
cool.
If I pop down, one of these is going to have an image. There we go. So there's one. So this is my own blog, so I can read posts right here in Emacs. I just hit N and P just to go back and forth between posts here. And
Ah,
so that's where EmacsQL comes in. Is I needed a database to store all this information and efficiently index it. So if you look down at the bottom here, I press S, and I've got this filter. If you see, it says junk.
yeah,
10 weeks ago, I said week ago, I got an S, and then I start typing my blog name in. So it says live filtering what you
yeah.
see here.
Wow.
So let's say I want to see everything with the tag YouTube. So I can just do that, and that's all the YouTube stuff from the last 10 weeks. So I'll narrow it down to 4 weeks, or I can go back to 1 week, or I can say 1 day ago.
Wow. I'd like to have that kind of quick browsing through something like my org data. So really cool stuff. Huh.
Yes, so I needed a way to search this fast, and I ended up writing my own little database format, and I'm
That's
still
like the
not satisfied. What was that?
that's like the definition of yak shaving right there.
Yeah. Well, there's no database that's really suitable for this yet in Emacs. So that's why I struck out to write EmacsQL to try to provide this database so it would never have to be done again. And I started porting lfeed to EmacsQL, but I haven't finished that yet. And I'm not sure if I really want to do that or not, but that's
Hmm.
something that's possible in the future.
So it sounds like you handle fair bit of your life inside Emacs.
Yeah.
You read blogs, you work with web browsers and other things like that. What else do you do inside Emacs? How else has it taken over other things that you do?
So I do email too.
Yeah,
So I can pop over here. I prefer not much as my email client.
I've
That's
heard
a
good.
fair, you've heard what?
I've heard good things about it. What do you
Yeah.
like about it?
I like so if you I'm afraid to like bring up email because I don't want
Yeah,
anything
no,
to
no, no, no,
come up.
because people's
That's
config and all, sorry, email addresses and whatever.
yeah. This one
I'm
should be
pretty much
safe.
for game. Yeah.
Uh, so there are
Huh.
tags. If you notice, this looks pretty similar to LFeed.
Yeah.
So we got tags on the right there. So this actually inspired the interface for LFeed because I started using LFeed shortly after I started using Not Much.
Mm-hmm.
So I just like how fast searching is and how quickly everything works. It's really nice to use. I
Especially
did,
with 12,741 messages that you have in it. Is
yeah,
that?
and that goes back to about 2005. I like pretty much all my
Wow.
email.
Hmm, maybe I should give it a try. I'm currently using News for handling mail, but not much does look very interesting.
Yeah,
Cool. Okay, so
I
you
did.
do mail. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I did try MU4A.
Yeah.
If I'm saying it right, that's what it's called, right?
Yeah, I have no idea how to
Uh,
pronounce things either.
I tried that, and I didn't. It wasn't as nice as Not Much. That's why I ended up going with Not Much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um,
So you have mail. Your config mentioned that you use calc. Do you use it just as a
yeah,
calculator? Or do you do any of the other fancy things in it?
uh, pretty much as an arbitrary precision calculator. See, I already had something in there. I was computing. Uh, like a lot of times, I just like what's 2 to the 128. I just like being able to do that like anytime I want without worrying about precision. And it's useful to be able to do these quick calculations. And I always have Emacs up anyway, so I can just jump to that. And if I need to do units, it can keep track of units for me. So I can do seconds, and I can say convert it to years, and it's really handy.
I still have to get the hang of all those things, but that's great. That was, calc is kind of Emacs in microcosm. It's this absurdly powerful and flexible thing with
Yeah,
capabilities I have no idea.
yeah. It can do calculus.
Yeah,
It's crazy. It's a full computer algebra system. So I think it's not fair to call it a calculator, really, because it's so much more than that.
yeah, yeah. So there's that. You write a lot of Markdown, I'm guessing, from your config.
Oh yeah. Uh, well, I write my blog in Markdown, so all those posts are in Markdown, and all the readmes. I just prefer Markdown for pretty much all my documentation. I haven't made the jump to org mode yet. It's been this like thing that I haven't learned. I never learned enough about it to really make good use of it. Which I know you love org mode, right?
I find it to be similarly flexible, right? You can do all sorts of crazy things with it. But I guess if you've
Yeah,
already got a lot of things in Markdown, then you basically have that as your kind of the way that your brain works. Most of
yeah,
it's very similar, but I guess some of the syntax would be just different enough to have that little bit of friction you would get over.
yeah.
Yeah. So if you're not using org mode, are there other ways that you manage your tasks? Do other things in Emacs?
Um, so I've outside of this, I'm actually not all that organized. I kind of, I guess, work from my head a lot of the time, more than I probably should. So I probably forget things without even knowing I'm forgetting them.
Well, you managed to
Um,
write a whole lot of rather large-looking pieces of code, even with just keeping it in your head. So,
yeah,
uh, wow.
that was something else about LFeed. Because I noticed you had written a post recently about because you had logged all your activities, you could keep track of how much time you'd spent doing various things.
Yeah.
That actually recently came up with LFeed. Is on the side of my website. If I'm gonna go look at that really quick, you'll see um, these lists of places
Yeah.
that I recommend checking out. These huge lists. I was kind of manually maintaining these lists until recently, when I realized I could tap the LFeed database to fill these out for me. It's like I'm already maintaining all this stuff in LFeed, so I could say they give me this. So I could. So here's what I worked out. So here's my blog. So here's where the lists come from. So it's like here's a list of blogs I was recommending.
Yeah.
So I wrote this function called Jekyll. This is how I use Jekyll for my blog. So Jekyll insert
Yeah.
URLs, and I've got a little filter string here, and that's
Yeah.
this thing.
Yeah, I see that.
So I can just run this. I just evaluate it right here in the buffer, and it'll fill in. Oh, I got to load that. It's so new, I'm not auto-loading it properly yet. Let's load that. And then I just run this, and it goes into, well, it's supposed to be working.
That's okay. It's the nature of all demos to have something go wrong. But
Yeah.
I see the idea where since you already have that data in your reader anyway, you might as well use that same interface for searching through tags or whatever. You might even consider kind of capturing your reading data and then organizing the list so that the stuff that you like reading more actually does show up earlier in the list.
Yeah. That's something I should probably track more, is like as I read things, sort of rate them or somehow track that information and capture that in LFeed. And so I've got a database right there, I can capture that information and perhaps make use of it in the future.
Huh. The nice thing about Emacs, right, is, oh, hey, look at that. You have your list again. Is that you can do all this instrumentation and tinkering around. So that's, oh goodness, cool. Okay, so you do a heck of a lot of things in Emacs. Is there anything that you haven't gotten around to doing in Emacs yet?
There's a barrier for me to learn new programming languages. And this touches on skewer mode. Before I get into the language, I want to have a workflow set out in Emacs the way I like it, and that's how skewer came about. Is I need to learn JavaScript and web development, but I need to find some workflow in Emacs to make that work. And I looked at Swink.js, and it didn't quite do what I was looking for, and ended up writing skewer mode while I learned JavaScript to make that work.
Sorry, let me see if I understand this correctly. You wanted to learn JavaScript, and so you developed something in Emacs to talk interactively using JavaScript to a browser, ending up writing however many lines of code that is in JavaScript, so it'll communicate with the Emacs process.
Yes.
In order to learn JavaScript.
Yes. That's part of learning it. It's a good exercise too, I think.
That's totally awesome. I would have expected, kind of like, oh, you've been doing this for a while, you'd had like years of experience with JavaScript, and then you got really tired of having to do the round trip or whatever, but to have that kind of be your first step into this is really cool.
Yeah.
So
I guess I could demonstrate some of that really quick with how that works. So here I say, let's clear this out first. So kind of blank tab. I use Pentadactyl, by the way, so I can switch around tabs here and do commands. So I've got a Vim-like interface to my browser rather than an Emacs-like interface. So anyway, I start out by saying run skewer, and what this will do is this launches a tab in the browser here, just a blank tab that's connected to Emacs. So if I pop into a JavaScript scratch buffer, so I've got a scratch buffer for basically every language. So you got scratch for Emacs Lisp. I hit Control-Shift-J, so I can actually launch. I was kind of wanting to do this. So there's a little keyboard thing, so you can see what I'm doing. So if I can just hit Control-Shift-S to jump to my scratch buffer, or if I want to go to JavaScript, I hit Control-Shift-D. I don't know why something else was conflicting, so I went with D. So I got a scratch buffer here, and I can write JavaScript expressions like 13 to the 2.1. And oh, I got another. Oh, that's my other computer actually. I was working on something and it's still connected. So let me kill that. So I can evaluate values here and
Yeah.
I put them in the buffer. And there's also a REPL. Um,
I love the profusion of REPLs that we've had, come out lately, right? Because you can just interact with all these different systems.
yeah, that's that. I love live systems. Steve Yegi has a really well done essay about live systems and why they're powerful. So I recommend checking that out. You can probably find it on Google pretty quick. Um,
Hmm.
so this is connected to this tab right here, and to prove that, I can switch to my CSS scratch buffer, and I can uh, edit CSS live. So I can say I want the background to be red, and I evaluate
That.
just like I would Emacs Lisp or JavaScript. So I say Control X, Control E, and it evaluates that role.
Holy cow.
And then like, oh, I want some JavaScript in here, so I switch to an HTML buffer. I say skewer HTML insert selector. So I'm gonna insert the page. Uh,
Wow.
this part's a little bit crude, so I gotta add this really quick. So I haven't really refined this yet because it's got limited use. So say I want to add this heading to the page, um, and I can evaluate this H1 just like I would an expression. You can see it flash there on the screen, and there it goes. And if I decide, oh, I want an exclamation point, throw that on the end. And then I say, oh, you know what? I want this sans serif. And then I want, oh yeah, I want this to be white. And you can add rainbow mode to this, which is somebody else's mode. It does this coloration too. I learned about that recently.
Wow. How do you save the results afterwards? If you find you really like your code, you just
Uh,
write off for everything, or
well, you could just save your buffers, but that
yeah,
might not be sufficient. So there's no way to really capture what's there right now.
that's
If I try to show off how this works, so I'm going to pop up. I want to pop up this. So I'm going to go to the inspector. Let's move this off to the side. Um, if you see these styles
I
are showing up on the bottom here, so it's actually just kind of appending style sheets to the page to get everything done.
I
So
see.
here's the first one I did, here's the next one I did,
Yeah, and the
here's
first.
the last
Mhm.
one. So it's just kind of building these up, and it's a mess on the page. So I don't know if you'd really want to capture that
Yeah.
as is.
But it's good for experimentation, and I
Yes.
can see how that live workflow would be, really great for feedback. Because even the hassle of hitting refresh on a page after you change the CSS is just a
Yes.
little bit more friction.
Yeah. I hate that so much. I want to treat web development as another live system I can hack
Yeah.
and build. So I can go further with this. So here's my blog again. Now, so you see this little green
Yeah.
triangle in the top right corner?
Yeah.
I can click and toggle that. When it's green, that means skewer is connected to this page. So I can say, pop up here. And this works not just with my blog. This is a little browser extension I wrote to make this work with Skewer. So I can toggle this on any page. If I'm on GitHub, although this will not work on GitHub because they've got security cranked up so much they won't let this work. But it is here on every single page. So I can hook into it and come over here and I can execute code on that page just like this. So I can
Wow.
do the same CSS rules and make my page ugly. So that way I can tap into anything and do whatever I need to make it work.
I had to go get that set up. Definitely. Yeah, that's cool. So I guess you use that for a lot of development.
Yes, it's made JavaScript one of my preferred languages to use actually. Because there's WebGL now, and you've got HTML5 Canvas, and you've got
Hmm.
all of HTML. So if I need to do something with if I want to write a program live that has a graphical interface, like, oh, I got JavaScript and HTML. I can just hack this up without ever refreshing the page, just kind of build everything up as I go.
You mean
It's
like
really
the
nice.
Voronoi toy that thing that we're looking at in your
Uh,
show?
oh, yeah, so that's what I was doing before we started. It's really cool because I got something working in it. So this thing, if you're familiar with the
Yeah.
Voronoi diagram, so each color, it's each
It's
section here, this is everything that's closest to this particular
yeah.
vertex right here. And so that's the diagram. And my original idea with this was I could write, this is WebGL, by the way.
Yeah.
So I could write a shader that for each pixel on the screen would compare its distance to every vertex in the diagram and color itself appropriately. And the GPU should be really good at that. But I came up with an even better version that involves these three-dimensional cones and the depth buffer, and it's a lot faster. And so that's why I've got this up. But you can actually drag these around just like this. And this is it's actually a little slow on this machine because I'm using just the plain open source drivers at Debian chips, so it's not quite as fast as on a machine with like real video drivers. So I can interact with this thing, and it's pretty fast considering that it's not doing any sort of exact evaluation of the Voronoi diagram, because there's something called Fortune's algorithm where you have this sweep line that travels across and builds this stuff up. It's not doing any of that fancy stuff. This is just really a brute force thing with the
Oh,
graphics card doing most of the work.
cool.
And this was developed live with Skewer like this, so I can change the shaders and update the page while it's running and try things out without having to do that refresh stuff.
Hmm. So you are working on a lot of cool things. One
Yeah.
thing that I wanted to make sure you mention, also because also because it's really cool too, non-technical, but you release, I guess, practically all of your things into the public domain.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that decision. What got you interested in it, and how has that played out?
So I started out using the GPL like 7 years ago when I was kind of really. So I'd read Richard Stallman's Free Software, Free Society. I actually have a signed version of that by him right here, and I got really into the Free Software Foundation. I had a membership, and I was licensing everything I did under the GPL, everything I did at home, even if it wasn't very useful. And I decided as I got more experience, just those licenses were cumbersome. If I wanted to use even just a snippet of somebody else's code to formally follow their license, and now I've got to list their name on it with their copyright and do all this, follow all these rules to make that work, and it just felt cumbersome to have to worry about this licensing stuff all the time. And especially as you involve more and more works that have all of their own licenses, it gets cumbersome, even if it's just these three-clause BSD licenses that are just, give me credit. Even
Mm,
that gets cumbersome. So I decided I didn't want to have any part of that. I just want to make my code as useful as it can be to as many people as possible. And I do that by putting it in the public domain.
that's
So nobody has any obligations to me when they use this stuff.
And thanks for doing that. There's certainly a lot of stuff that people can build on. So, for example, that web server is probably going to get added to my to my Emacs config shortly after this. But it's
Okay.
great that you're sharing that so freely. Cool. Do you have any other tips for people who are curious about, say, getting into Emacs internals or playing around with some of this cool stuff?
Um, so so you have the Emacs source code. So if you have sometimes not everything's documented clearly in doc strings, so you might have to dig into source code to see how it works. Or if you're having bugs, a lot of times you need to dig into the source code to see what's wrong. So I guess the main resources are I don't actually read the Emacs manual much at all. That's kind of a high level
Yeah.
user thing. It's not really if you're hacking Emacs and uh, tinkering with it, that's not that useful. So the real useful manual is the Emacs list reference manual, which comes with Emacs. So if you come in here, it's just going to be called eLisp on the top level if you go through the info page here. And this is everything, or almost everything. It covers all this stuff. You see how long this index is right here. The index is 1,400 lines of everything that's here. So you can come in here. You can just search for anything in particular. So like, so how do processes work? So I can just search for the string processes and dive in and read about how everything works. And there are lots of sections here that I have features that I'm unaware of, and I get surprised by all the time. So yeah, use the Emacs list reference to see what all Emacs can do, how you can hack it, and then occasionally you got to dig into the source code of Emacs itself just to see how things work. A recent example of that, in lfeed, there was a bug where somebody wanted to use X, so I think it's X get selection, so you get the latest keyboard selection, or clipboard selection. However, this function, how it's defined depends on what platform you're on, and the doc string is, well, this one's longer, but it doesn't really elaborate on how the different platforms vary here. So you just have to really, and that's what's convenient about this. See the select.el on here? Actually, I made a keyboard shortcut so I can just jump to, whenever I'm on one of these help pages, I can just jump right into the documentation here. So you can come in here and see, okay, so this is exactly what's going on with this function.
Yeah, I find myself using a find function at point all the time now.
Yeah, that's basically like that, what that little link was. So I'll come into here and just kind of understand how things are working in this way.
Yeah, I find that edebug is super helpful for wandering around. But sometimes when I'm looking at something, I find myself needing to dig into the C source as well. So
oh yeah, occasionally, yeah, I end up there. Yeah, but it's kind of neat to see. So that's another way that I've gotten into the internals here. Is I've actually written 2 different Lisp interpreters. One of them I wrote myself, and it was a really crappy little toy Lisp. And then another one I did with the Brian Taylor that I mentioned before. We wrote a scheme implementation together. So I have experience with how Lisps are put together internally. So I can look at Emacs and see a lot of similarities that come in and quickly understand what's going on and navigate my way around that way.
Did you do Lisp before coming to Emacs, or the other way around?
It's hard to say, as it might have been the Lisp that interests me, and so I got into Emacs initially. But I said 9 years ago when I got started, it was both Lisp and Emacs I was getting into at the same time. So I actually can't remember which one exactly came first.
Yeah.
They kind of came hand in hand that way. So when you hear people, like you might see online a question, how do I get into Common Lisp? Like one of the recommendations is like learn how to use Emacs, because that's where the most powerful Lisp editing features are right now.
Oh, yeah, a lot of people are talking about, other editors like Table or whatever, but yeah, I mean, Emacs makes sense as you customize everything, and a lot of people have built very interesting workflows on top of it. So
yeah,
thanks for sharing your workflow. It looks really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that certainly gives me a lot of things to play around with after this, and I hope people listening, both live and afterwards, get to play around with all this stuff too. Thank you again so much for taking the time to share your workflow. Out of curiosity, so I'm doing these Emacs chat episodes as a way for people to get to know other people who use Emacs, how they're using it, what are some of the cool things they're working on. Is there anyone you'd like to see on one of these episodes?
If I were to pick a name, I'd say Steve Purcell.
Yeah?
He's kind of the curator of Melpa right now.
Yeah. Which is super awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I'll reach out and see if he's interested. Okay, thank you so much.
This feels like a witch hunt sort of thing. Like, give me a name, and you go onto them, and then they give you a name.
Well, I find that, there's just simply no way to keep track of all the cool things that are going on in Emacs. I came across your blog, and that's great. And now I don't even remember. Are you on? You must be on Planet Emacs then, right?
My blog,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it shows up there or not.
Huh, maybe I should. Maybe I should. Maybe yeah, I should check because it's a great way to discover other people's blogs. And but sometimes there are people who are doing all sorts of cool stuff who don't show up there. So at least I'm glad we've had this chat, and I look
Me too.
forward to other people's workflows as well. And if you're listening and you have a cool Emacs story or demo, please feel free to reach out. You can find this stuff at emacslife.com or at sashachulo.com. Emacs Life is probably easier to spell. And Christopher, where is the best place for people to find you?
I guess my blog and on GitHub are the two ways. And my email address is easy to find, so you can email me, or you can, if it's related to one of my packages, you can just open an issue on GitHub, and I try to get to those pretty quick. Although I've got a few hanging issues that are kind of unresolved right now, but I try to get to them fast.
Yeah, GitHub's really uh, been great for discovering interesting Emacs packages, configuration, all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
that's good. So that's nullprogram.com and github.com/skeeto, Skeeto.
Yep.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening in. I'm going to end the broadcast here. You can find the recording on the Google Plus events page, and it will also be available at emacslife.com eventually once we get this, the page and the transcript and all sorts of other good things sorted out. And all of that will be in the public domain as well. Yeah. So I hope I get all that like usual license terms right or whatever. Anyway, so I will just copy whatever Chris is already using. Okay, folks, thanks for listening. I'm going to click on Stop Broadcast now. Have fun. See you next time, which is actually tomorrow. But that one's not on Google Hangout on air. Anyways, I can stop rambling. Bye.